Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Fearless Road podcast, where we explore entrepreneurial insights, stories, and advice on embracing fear, breaking boundaries, and achieving goals on the road to success. I'm your host, Michael Devous. And after years of overcoming obstacles and tragedy, I began to wonder, how does someone become fearless? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out. In every episode, we dive into the lives of individuals who've learned to turn fear into fuel, face some incredible challenges, and cultivate a fearless mindset while navigating their fearless road. So join me for in-depth interviews with some amazing people where we investigate more deeply the valleys on their road to success, because the valleys are where character is built, foundations are laid, and where the fearless are born. Welcome to the Fearless Road podcast. And now we're back with part 2 of the interview with Maria Failla. When we left, we were asking the question what it's like to leave Broadway and literally move into the woods.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, first off, I feel like there was a lot of processing of grief in that transition that the plants really helped me with. You know, I don't know if I would have ever been brave enough to walk away from my career if it hadn't been for COVID-19. So I was very, I was thriving in my performing career. I had just gotten off tour. I had gotten into another show in New York City, and COVID happened, and my show closed three nights before opening. And this was a theater that I had been auditioning for 10 years. Like, it was an ultimate dream of mine that I finally booked it. It felt so aligned. My idol was the director of the show. Like, there were just so many things that were like, oh my God, this is it. And then it just got like ripped out from under me, and my brain kind of broke. And then obviously like COVID-19, that will also break your brain, like that whole, and I lived in New York City. So that also just is anyone living in New York City, like the level of trauma that we just had to process living there is,
it's compounded.
Yeah.
For in y'all's situation.
Yeah.
I say y'all because I'm from the South. We had land. We can get out and walk.
I had 500 square feet.
But
yeah, it was was rough. And I also was getting married at the time. And so we had to cancel our wedding. So in one foul swoop, I lost my job. We had to cancel our wedding, and we had to reschedule our wedding 3 times. And then we also decided once I lost my job and I didn't really have a means of income anymore, because I had started the podcast as a pure passion project. Like, I never thought that I would I didn't think it was possible to like make money, like become a professional planty podcaster. Like, what the hell? That's so weird. So
well, this was pre-COVID podcasting. Most of us thought, oh, that's cute.
Right, exactly. Unless you're at like a major, network, you can't really make a full-time living out of it. So it was just supposed to be like something on the side for fun that I was doing. And so, I say that just, to be very transparent and honest, that I had a lot of stuff taken away from me at that time, which forced me to walk away. It wasn't necessarily that I had this like very empowered, brave, I'm in the show and I think, no, I'm leaving. And I'm very
well, and let me interrupt you there because, I don't want you to diminish the bravery that you faced as a result of the circumstances that were presented to you. I mean, everybody has different circumstances thrust upon them, whether by invitation or intention.
Totally.
And that journey we take, once we meet that, that moment, what we do with it from there forward, this bad words, is still brave and still shows a certain fearlessness. And I think regardless of how it was presented to you and the circumstances were brought to you for your transition, you still had to make the choices and you still had to live through those circumstances.
100%.
So please don't diminish that for yourself.
And no, I appreciate you saying that, actually, because I think there were so many opportunities when things went wrong with the podcast, with the book, with this, with that I could have like totally given up and just, I joke that when my show got canceled, I just like drank Aperol spritzes and cried in my bathtub for 60 days straight. Like, I was a wreck for 2 months. And
what? That was my COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't even have a
I know. I was like, okay, enough with the Aperol spritzes, Maria. Like, you're not on a good path. So I was brave enough to be like, to pattern interrupt and be like, okay, this is what life has given me. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to cry and just like stay unemployed and miserable, or are we going to like shake things up? And my husband and I decided to move in with my parents for 6 months to kind of just like reassess. And then we moved actually to the woods, similarly, to the setup you have, Michael.
Out of an apartment in New York and into
we moved
into
from
the woods, and off we go.
Yes, exactly. We moved from 500 square feet to 5 acres in the middle of COVID.
Amazing.
At that point, I had gotten my book deal, so I was like, "Oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to move to this log cabin in the woods, and I'm going to write my book in the woods, and it's going to be amazing." Which it was. It was very cool. It was very poetic. So fear has played a huge role in this whole transition. I like to say that entrepreneurship feels like you're walking around with no skin on. You are so vulnerable. You are so exposed, especially when you're the center point of your brand. Everything that I was doing, my podcast was me interviewing people, my Instagram, my socials, my book was a self-help book about my experience of using plants to live a happier life. Being so exposed like that and I'm coming from a career where I played other people. I didn't have to play myself. I got to step into other roles. There was fear associated with that. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I had a lot of like, no one's listening to the podcast because of what I'm doing. Everybody's listening because of the guests that I'm getting.
And I'm going to jump in here real quick because as a former performer myself, I talked to Phaedra about this. I think it was in one of our opening interviews that she interviewed me. So both you and I are talking right now about entrepreneurship, right? This is what the show deals with. We talk to entrepreneurs all the time, and this is our listener base. In order to be an entrepreneur, you have to expose yourself and all of you to the world, especially in today's versions of entrepreneurs where branding is you. You're the brand.
And the founder story. Yeah.
And the founder story, we have to be so vulnerable in order to tap into that creativity that allows us to become successful entrepreneurs. And when we do that, when we get into that space and that mindset, we're constantly exposed. As performers, though, I struggled with identity in the sense that I was so used to giving everybody a version of myself that fit their need, that fit their circumstance, that fit that show. I didn't know which coat of many colors to put on this time. I didn't know what to do. And Phaedra had told me, she's like, get rid of all of it. Just try to be the most authentic version of you without that show voice, without that persona where you talk like this all the time. And it's, I didn't know how.
You were big with the radio voice at the start.
I didn't know how to turn it off.
Yeah.
I knew how to, it was just so natural for me. Is that what you were dealing with too? I'm assuming that was where you were.
100%. And I think only after over a year, it took me at least a year of not being in the industry to understand how toxic my relationship with the industry was and how I was this like, kind of I don't want to say worst case version of myself because I'm proud of what I did in the industry, but I was so competitive. I had no self-esteem. Like I had negative self-esteem because, especially just getting told like over and over again, you're too fat for this role. You're not pretty enough for this role. You're not this enough for this role.
Cassie, can you please get back in line?
Right. Exactly. Like that kind of thing. So it was only after I started actually getting out of the industry and realizing what my real personality was because I was just so obsessed with the casting directors approving of me that I was just doing anything I could to get approval. That's when I really I feel like I got so much funnier. I feel like I got so much kinder. I feel like I've always had this big heart that all of a sudden I was able to expose authentically that I wasn't scared.
Well, it comes through in your photographs when you're promotional. Very rare, this. We see photographs all the time. People trying to be funny and look fantastic, and you know what I mean. But your photos on your website, the joy and the laughter and the energy that comes through in your eyes, the light in your eyes, is so there.
It's so genuine.
Yeah,
thank you.
So genuine. Like you can tell that it like lights up your soul and it like shines out of every pore.
Thank you. It really does. But I also think, nature, if you're a listener and you're going through this kind of identity crisis that I think a lot of people go through, especially if you change industries, especially in the States where your job is such a large part of your identity. Like when you travel, talk about Italy, like your job is not part of your identity if you're Italian, but like in the States it is. You know, spending time in nature. So nature is the ultimate nervous system regulator. We are nature, right? I talk about this in my book, but you know, what our ancestors, our grandpa's grandpa, you know, the originator of our gene pool, gene line, you know, they evolved in nature. They were in the woods. They were
one with nature.
One with nature. And as society has evolved, we've gotten completely disconnected from it. However, we crave, our body, our nervous system, our cells crave being in nature because we also are natural. And I think a lot of us I think part of the identity crisis is we're so disconnected from nature that it's harder for us to connect with ourselves. And so if you are going through this identity crisis, getting into nature, going for walks in the woods, that was a huge thing that I did. Like I went for walks in the local woods near my house, near my parents' house every day, just to kind of be with my thoughts. You know, if I had to cry that day, I cried. If I had to giggle that day, I giggled. If I had to be nothing, like if I just had to walk with a deadpan and just not feel emotions, I could do that. And nature just kind of lets you be who you are, where you are in that moment. And I think
I love that you say this because this is one of the things I highlighted. It's my next question up, and you're doing such a good job because you must be tapping into what I was thinking because, ladies and gentlemen, I took about 75 notes from this book. There's so much into this. There's so much in this book. It is so deep-rooted. There's so much in this book.
So great.
But one of the quotes I wanted you to tell me about, and you know that you've led me into this, was on, I can't remember the page. Tell us about the time and the average of Americans spend indoors and expand on this idea of attention restoration theory and forest bathing.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So that is the story I was getting
Forest bathing. Has anyone heard of forest bathing?
I actually did before I read the book.
Yes. And I'm so happy that at least people have heard about it, because I do feel like some magazines have talked about it now. Like it is kind of circling up to the top of culture, and I hope that everybody learns about it. So yeah, before COVID, there was a kooky study that was like you spend 90% of your time indoors, Americans. And now after COVID, I can't even imagine what that is. And I know for me as a, solo entrepreneur podcaster, like I could not leave my house for 3 days. I live in the woods. I work by myself. My office is next to my bedroom. Like I could just never leave my house. Right.
Well, how many of us just learned how to begin doing that in a deeper level?
Exactly.
Like before we spent all this time indoors and in front of our computer screens or whatever. Now with binge watching Netflix, with remote work and everything, how much more of our time is
exacerbated.
Spent,
Totally.
Yeah.
So, and so I think burnout is a huge conversation right now. People are so burned out. And so that's where this concept of attention restoration theory really comes in. It's a concept that's been published by some scientists, the Kaplans, a married couple. It's been talked about a lot. It's a theory. So, it's a theory. But it's about the idea that there's two different types of attention, direct and involuntary. And our nervous systems need both to be at peace, to be at kind of homeostasis. So direct attention is what we're using when we work from home or, when we binge watch a Netflix show. It's focused. You have to block out external stimuli to focus on getting the job done. If you're doing emails, if you're on a Zoom call, we're using direct attention right now as we talk.
Yes.
It's it is not limitless. You only have a certain amount of it, and it requires a lot of energy. Then there's involuntary attention. So our ancestors were able to access involuntary attention much easier because they were spending more time in nature. But that's attention that can kind of just wash over you. Yes, you can focus on something. It's like if you're going for a walk and a butterfly flies across, your line of sight. You can take the butterfly in, you can watch it, and then keep going. When we were kids and we would lay on our backs and we would watch the clouds pass in the sky.
Yeah.
That kind of
and pick out patterns.
Yes, that experience. So that's involuntary. That is restorative, and we have a limitless amount of capacity to do that. And what's happening right now in society is that everybody is using direct attention way more than they should be, and not, we have to almost remind ourselves to use involuntary attention, because it's not.
When I read that, like, just actually what's funny, because last night I read that section after Phaedra and I had been on a Zoom call and a working call for, what, 3.5, 4 hours?
No, not that long yesterday, but... But yeah,
I was exhausted.
Yeah.
It was a long day for us both.
Mentally, I was exhausted. And when I realized that's what I was doing, I had used up my direct attention capacity, or whatever you want to call it. And I needed some of this indirect attention, some of this relaxed, restorative stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm, from now on, going to be putting it into practice, because I live out here in the woods. I can get out of this space for 15 to 20 minutes, walk in and touch the trees, and just give myself a little bit of that back. How can this be, and I'm assuming after the work that you've done and the research you've been working on and talking to people, do you see levels of productivity improving as a result of people practicing this? Have you talked to other entrepreneurs and people that put this into practice and benefit from it?
I think I don't have productivity measurement, but I think it's really how you feel. So I can speak from my personal experience. A big part of my awakening when I was starting to get, really get into plants was I would sit on my little balcony. I had, basil and chives. I had like a small little pot of herbs, and I would just watch dew drop from basil leaves. Like I would just zone out and watch dew drop off my basil leaves. And that was how I would start my morning. And, I just think when you give yourself the space for that involuntary attention, you are going to feel better. I mean, another thing I think about, we used to go, this is like so, I don't know if it's gross, so pardon me, but I think a perfect example of how like now as humans, it's our responsibility to find opportunities for involuntary attention because it's not necessarily available to us anymore. We used to go to the bathroom and not bring our phones. Like we used to go read the back, you read the back of the shampoo bottle, or you just kind of like do your business and zone out. Or people used to say like, I get my best ideas in the shower. That's because you didn't bring Netflix into the shower, or used to. But now you're listening to a podcast, you're bringing your phone in and watching something, you're listening to the radio, and you don't have that opportunity anymore. And you're fried.
That disconnect, right? That we're not disconnecting from these
media,
these stimulation things, these these stimuli.
Yeah.
Where back in the day, most of us, if it was stimuli that we didn't like, if it was stimuli, you identified with it, what it was, and it was commercials. And we would pause, fast forward, or if you didn't have that option because it was pre-DVR, we would mute and turn the TV down, go do something, and then come back after the commercial and watch the rest of our program. That was disconnecting and using this other attention, this other energy as a balancing practice. And today, we're never disconnected. It's in our hands. We're always hearing it, seeing it, getting bombarded by it.
Yeah, you can literally wake up and have no conversation with you can have no rapport with yourself for the entire day. You can wake up because of your alarm clock on your phone, stay on your phone all day, binge Netflix until you fall asleep, and like you haven't had one original thought because you're just stimulated and taking things in. And I kind of view involuntary attention, or to me, spending time with plants, to me they're like one and the same, is like putting your armor on for the day. It's like putting your protection on. There's another, I don't know if you want to get into this or a few of other things you want to talk about, but in my book, I talk about how you can look at a plant before you look at a screen in the morning. That was like a huge...
Yes, I remember you talking
routine,
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, your routine.
I love that.
Yeah, for people who are, too far down the rabbit hole where they're like, how would I even go about finding more opportunities for involuntary attention? Like, leave your phone alone in the morning. Look at a plant. Go spend time in nature before you look at a screen, before you look at your phone, look at your computer, look at your emails. It is such a simple thing that is so hard to do, and you will feel so much better throughout the day if you do that one little one little change in your morning routine. I promise. This is something I've heard back from listeners that, or readers that, you know, they've put it to practice, or they've tested it and really felt so much better.
Well, and this, God, you're so good. Next question, which this actually leads right into, I was going to ask you about specifically for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs who are just starting out there, about tips and tricks and advice, 3 tips, tricks and advice. And this mindful practice, by the way, you're going to hear it, ladies and gentlemen, meditation, mindful practice, getting back in touch with your vulnerability and your authentic self. I mean, we can beat you over the head with this thousands and thousands of times. You're going to continue to hear it on the show, Fearless Road podcast, because it works. It's real.
It really is.
And each of my guests, each of my guests has put into practice a certain aspect of this mindfulness in order to help their career. And what Maria is sharing with us is crucial to being in touch with your true self. And when you are, out of that comes real productivity. Out of that comes real creativity. Out of that comes real ingenuity. And that's the gift that she's bringing with the joy of, well, I just forgot the name of it. The joy of
growing
joy.
Growing joy.
Yeah.
The growing joy. Well, and
hello.
And you know, we were talking about this in a coaching group I'm in the other day, about how important it is when you take a break to get outside in nature, and even the act of simply just putting your hand and touching a tree, like even for just 3 seconds, like it literally resets your mind.
Yeah.
So that when you get back in the office, you've got this extra level of being refreshed. You've got renewed creativity. You have a little more inspiration. And, just such a small little thing, a 10-minute walk and putting your hand on a tree, and it's just like makes the whole rest of your day a completely different scenario.
Well, we used to, I'm trying to remember where this came from and when the first time I heard it, when we were younger. I'm talking the 80s. People used to take their shoes and socks off and put your feet in the grass. And my mom used to make us do it, put our feet in the grass and feel the grass. And I used to love the feeling of good grass. Not Texas grass.
Yeah.
Not... But real warm, loving green grass. But you're right. You would be grounded.
Yeah, I talk about grounding in my book. I do it every day. And I was actually, Phaedra, when you were saying that, you can literally just go take 3 deep breaths on your lawn. Like put your bare feet on your lawn and take 3 deep breaths. Yep. And then you can go back inside. It could be that simple. And Michael, you had mentioned, meditation. I think in the mindfulness space, it can be really intimidating for people who maybe are burned out and are like, I don't want to sit alone with my thoughts. Like meditation sounds awful.
Yes.
And
I can tell you a lot of people I know who I've spoken to about that and talked about that. They're very sort of like, I don't know how to even begin doing that. But this idea of sharing a moment with a plant, which I know sounds kind of corny and weird, but
it's moving
just
meditation.
A few minutes.
Yeah, it's moving meditation.
It's
so much more accessible.
And to me, it's almost like it's an aid, right? Like instead of contemplative meditation, which is what most of us think of, like where you sit there and you kind of try to empty your brain and just have like time. That's really hard for a lot of people. But if you're sitting there and you're doing, a task that can become mindless, like wiping down your plant leaves or, checking moisture levels or whatever, right? Like it doesn't take a lot of focus to do that, but it's easier to quiet your mind when you're doing a task like that. So it almost assists in doing that. Like when I meditate, which is not often, but like I have to do guided meditations with I use Headspace app.
Me too. I love Headspace.
Because I can't sit there and empty my brain. There's too much going on. And it's hard enough to shut it down to go to sleep.
Yeah.
So
I love the Headspace.
Well, I feel like I've dominated. Oh, sorry, I interrupted. I feel like I've dominated this conversation a little bit more than Phaedra. Did you have something specifically you would like to ask Maria from what you've read and stuff?
I don't have questions as much as like there's a lot of things that really resonated with me in the book, and to touch back onto the pandemic, when you said you lost yourself you touched on this in the book, and your mother was the one who encouraged you to get outside and go on walks every day. And you talked to, and Michael and I were living together at the time, and we started doing some walks, and then and then he wound up doing more work remotely. And so I was kind of on my own most of the day while he was working. And so I would go out and walk every day by myself. And I found this amazing, like, little nature path, very close to the house that I would go out and walk every day. It was about like 3.5, 4 miles. And I would just go and walk, and observing the changes in the seasons and just kind of getting back to myself and getting that reset on a daily basis just really, really resonated with me, because you talked about doing the same thing, and also about how it helped you to find your voice again. So is that something that you want to expand on a little bit?
And this concludes part 2 of the interview with Maria Failla. Myself and my sister Phaedra will be back in part 3 when we discuss a little bit more about what it's like to find your voice again.